I deem it a privilege accorded to me to deliver this lecture in the memory of Dr. Nirmal Kumar Bose, who contributed immensely to diverse areas of anthropology and other subjects. I am also thankful to the IGNCA and Dr. Sachchidanand Joshi and Janapada Sampada Division and Professor Anil Kumar for giving me this opportunity. I have to say a few things about Professor Nirmal Kumar Bose. And in this lecture, From Colonial to Postcolonial Anthropology, I'll be moving back and forth from the writings of Professor Nirmal Kumar Bose. Professor Nirmal Kumar Bose, eminent scholar, prolific author, he wrote on varied subjects and history, archaeology, architecture, Indian civilization, nationalism, democracy, Gandhi, and so many other topics. But his main contribution, which was highlighted in this paper, is about unity and diversity in Indian civilization. Bose considered himself as a scientist, and his methodology involved field observations and logical inferences for assessing the objective conditions of social phenomena. Nirmal Kumar Bose believed and practiced that academic research must be useful to the society. He sought empowerment of scheduled tribes through education and organization. In this lecture, I'll be quoting liberally from many of the works of N.K. Bose, and also those who wrote about N.K. Bose also I am using them. I'm aware of the problems involved in using the terms colonial and post-colonial. The academic divisions between British period and post-independence period, writings of colonial administrators and foreign scholars, and knowledge construction during the colonial period and later, all these things are quite blurred. And then I am liberally using these terms in a very broad sense. When we go back to the colonial beginnings of anthropology, all anthropology students know that anthropology began as the study of other cultures for scientific curiosity of the Europeans and continued for administrative purposes in the course of colonization of the third world countries. Talal Asad, who wrote on the anthropology and the colonial encounter in his 8th volume, he mentions that the discipline was established by the Europeans to study non-European societies dominated by the European power, and it is meant for European audience. So other cultures are other than Europeans, and then it is meant for. But what is important is Talal Asad's book dealt with how British functionist anthropology contributed to the structure of power represented by the colonial system and how functionalism was used to implement and justify the system of indirect rule in Africa, where the traditional political institutions have been used. In India also, the British administration relied on the existing political institutions. Now, when actually the colonial administrators took interest in the Indian society, according to Nicholas Dirks, what colonial administrators labeled as Sepoy Mutiny in 1957, which is actually the first struggle for India's independence, they thought that they have to understand the study of races and tribes. The British felt the need that they should know more about the Indian people for dealing with them. The attempt to understand the customs began at that juncture. The accounts of ethnographers and administrators played important role in declaration of communities as criminals. To understand practices like sati, hook swinging, and many others, and then in order to regulate them. Preference is given in recruitment and into military to certain castes and races with the assumption that they are the best choice for the military service. The colonial government's ethnographic survey was part of 1901 census. All provincial states and governments were made to collect information on communities in their territories. While caste and tribal identities are claimed and maintained by people, they are imposed from outside. Stereotypes have been constructed, communities are branded, and labels given by the colonial masters and the national government are internalized by the people. These processes have been elaborated by Nicholas Dirks in his book The Castes of Mind, 2001. In the beginning of the colonial expansion, all Indians were considered as pagans and tribes. Matthew Atmore Shering, a missionary and also an Indologist, wrote a number of books and castes on castes and tribes in India. Shering used categories such as Brahminical tribes, Kshatriya tribes, Vaishya tribes, Shudra tribes, and Aboriginal tribes in his volumes. The colonial authors were mostly administrators without formal training in academic anthropology, such as Crook, Grierson, Mills, Dalton, Russell, O'Malley, Thurston, Blunt. They are the first people to produce books on caste system, customs, and traditions. Good number of earlier census commissioners happened to be anthropologists such as Baines, Risley, and Hutton. Baines, 1891 census, Risley, 1901 census, Hutton, 1931 census. Indian census contributed to anthropological studies by documenting racial and ethnic distribution of people. From 1870 onwards, ethnographic accounts were part of the census documents. The enumeration of community divisions in terms of race and caste, which the colonial government gave importance, was given up after independence from 1951 census onwards. Maybe now we are going back to the caste census, which was given up in 1951. However, caste data pertaining to scheduled castes and scheduled tribes continued to be collected to fulfill constitutional obligations towards these communities. The association of anthropologists with government continued after independence, with scholars like Nirmal Kumar Bose, Verer Elven playing a prominent role in policy making and administration. The colonial writers moved away from treating everyone as a tribal, which Shering wrote in the beginning, that they made a distinction between tribes and castes later. A distinction has been made, resulting in treatment of tribes as a distinctive category different from castes. Racial and linguistic categorizations added to these differences. A separate identity came into existence for the tribals as primitive and backward forest-dwelling communities having distinctive cultures. Many studies were carried out in the form of ethnographic surveys. Explanations for the origin of caste were influenced by conjectural evolutionary schemes, along with contributions based on diffusion and functionalism. B.S. Cohn, the American anthropologist, categorizes the colonial writers on Indian society into three categories: Orientalists, the missionaries, and the administrators. And these three categories wrote differently, and they have influenced generations of Indian anthropologists. Missionary accounts are deliberate projections of Indian society as a corrupt society and Indian culture as a degraded culture. Missionaries have their own purpose. Administrators focused more on requirements of government, on caste, tribes, village communities, land tenure, crafts. So their interests are revenue and in market. The Orientalists learned Sanskrit for better understanding of Hindu texts and were appreciative of Indian legal, philosophical, and other systems. The Orientalists saw stability in the system and explained the fall of civilization due to external interventions. And after these categories, we have the Indian anthropologists who were studying the tribes and castes, and then they were not much different from the British administrators. They were also studying tribal people as distinctive population. And though many studies were conducted by these anthropologists, and much contribution was made, there has been a negative perception about anthropology right from very early decades of Indian anthropology. This negative perception continues even today. And Ayyappan, writing about this negative perception, gave some of the reasons for the misunderstanding of the discipline. Intellectuals like, he gave 4 reasons, Ayyappan. Intellectuals like C. Rajagopalachari felt that anthropology is only a means to satisfy the ideal curiosity of the Europeans. Secondly, the Brahminical intellectuals were unhappy about the description of villages made by Western scholars like Kathleen Gow. Rulers of the princely states were not happy with accounts of illiteracy and poverty in their own territories. Writings of anthropologists on youth dormitories and so on conveyed a wrong image of anthropology. In fact, one of my teachers used to tell us, Marias and their Gothel, or the Kingdom of the Young, the abridged version, both of them are a kind of soft pornography. So these kinds of wrong messages went, and then they became. So the negative perceptions about anthropology continued even today, for different reasons, that anthropologists are isolationists, conservative, and they are on the side of the administration, and so on. But moving beyond the colonial tradition, there were Indian anthropologists who began their studies, and after independence, we have Indian anthropologists, and then also the government also is the Indian government, which has actually replaced them. So one of the beginnings of the departure were seen in scholars carrying out their own fieldwork, not depending on government functionaries for data collection. Earlier, British administrators were all depending on various kinds of administrative structures for data collection. Tahsildars collected data for Thurston and many others, and this continued. But once the Indian anthropologists came, fieldwork actually they were doing on their own. A nationalist perspective can be seen in highlighting a picture of unity in diversity. This was followed by researches on welfare and development concerns by the Indian anthropologists. These concerns were not there during the British period. After establishment of anthropology departments and universities, trained anthropologists started undertaking studies on tribes and castes. One of the pioneers, Sarath Chandra Roy, made studies on Munda and Oravan. He is very critical of Risley for depending on government functionaries and rendering unreliable accounts, because as we know, the lower level functionaries were not aware of the purpose of collection of data and how it is going to be used. S.C. Roy started as an academic anthropologist, became an activist. He is also a mediator between administration and tribals, and he advocated the role of anthropology study of anthropology from an Indian point of view. And also he used a combination of Eastern and Western methods. Similar to S.C. Roy, Elvin, who also came later, was critical of shallow fieldwork and brief visits during the colonial period. And when we move beyond the colonial tradition, we have to mention Airavati Karve, well-known anthropologist pursuing ethnological and ethnological tradition. A nationalist perspective can be seen in Airavati Karve's work, tracing in unity and diversity by providing an overarching basis for all the diversities. Following ethnological tradition of her teacher J.S. Gure, Karve made use of classical texts to explain contemporary practices. Nirmal Kumar Bose studied diffusion of cultural practices. The academic background of geography facilitated Nirmal Kumar Bose to study the topic of Spring Festival of India for his PhD work, and later he took interest in cultural zones. The methodological shift can be seen in the work of N.K. Bose in adopting the combination of Indology, history, and ethnology. And of course, I don't want to talk much about this Hindu method of tribal absorption, which is very famous, but Nirmal Kumar Bose also started writing in Bengali language. First time, vernacular language, one anthropologist was writing. And in fact, P.K. Bose, who wrote on Nirmal Kumar Bose in a very celebrated book, He says that the pioneering trend in Indian nationalism began with N.K. Bose. Now, what are the shifts after independence? The shifts are ethnology to ethnography to social anthropology, culture contact, acculturation studies to culture change studies, village studies, study of civilization, welfare and development concerns, which were not there during the colonial period, study of policies, impact of industrialization, and also use of Indian concepts and classical texts. So, overcoming the legacy of the colonial masters, where they studied these tribal communities as distinctive cultures and so on, we have number of why anthropologists are interested in the study of tribal studies. Many of them are interested in the academic quest to study from authentic, original cultures untouched by the civilization. Anthropologists are always preoccupied with the study of authentic societies and original cultures to find out about the early societies, to understand the later societies. In various studies, tribal people have been treated as different, and concepts generated by colonial anthropologists in African countries, islands like Melanesia and Polynesia, were brought to explain cultural practice in India. Terms like tribe, caste, class, shaman, native, primitive are used without any hesitation. And we have critics actually, Gopal Sarana and then Dharni Sinha. They commented on the Indian anthropologists why they are studying like this. I quote, "We have become camp followers. As they have known the values, goals, and ideals of the culture, Indian anthropologists should have investigated Indian culture differently. But because of their training, they continued like foreign anthropologists. We adopted the concepts of great tradition and little tradition, economic frontier, text and context, and could not evolve anything better except Sanskritization." In this regard, Gopal Sarana and Dharni Sinha also quote N.K. Bose, who says that following Western scholars, we have not delved into the problems of the people. Now, we have people who are criticizing about these kinds of preoccupations of Indian anthropologists. Devanand, 1999, writing that he pointed to the lack of interest in contemporary social problems among Indian anthropologists. They have not participated in contemporary issues and debates. And earlier generation anthropologists are always interested in the study of traditional topics. For example, in 2007, N.S. Reddy, in a paper on slow growth of anthropology in South India, he listed areas that needed to be studied afresh or to be restudied by anthropologists in South India. What are the items he listed? Matrilineal societies, polyandrous societies, cross-cousin marriage, rural social structure, folklore, and similar things. So what is significant is, even in 21st century, a senior anthropologist giving a call for conducting studies on such topics, not mentioning any issue or topic of contemporary interest. This actually takes us back to the 1969 volume, Urgent Research in Social Anthropology. 40 years back, they mentioned similar concerns. 2007 also, the traditional concerns occupied the top priority for the anthropologists. Now, if we follow the Western social sciences, what are the consequences of the imported social sciences? I refer from Vinita Sinha. If we borrow from Western social sciences, it actually results in lack of creativity among the anthropologists to generate original theories and methods, uncritical adoption and imitation of Western anthropological models, essentialist constructions of society, confirming that they are opposite of what Europe represented, that is the Occident-Orient dichotomy, absence of subaltern studies, subaltern voices. So all these things, Vinita Sinha mentioned that these are actually described as academic dependency, scientific colonialism, and so on. And how this academic dependency and scientific colonialism was established. The domination is established through academic and research institutions, research funding, and control of research publications and journals. Through all these things, this academic domination continues. The predominant focus on tribal communities as distinctive cultures, and this actually many people criticize that we have created a fourth world within the third world. Ours is a third world country, and then the tribal communities became a fourth world within this third world country. So in fact, this Orientalism debate was there, Edward Said onwards, and then many people said we are homegrown Orientalists because we othered these people and then we actually projected them as totally different from us. Abhijit Guha traced the evolution of Indian anthropology beginning with a strong influence of N.K. Bose. And he started with N.K. Bose and then M.N. Srinivas and others. But in his occasional paper, Abhijit Guha presented a list of 7 nationalist anthropologists who did not follow colonial masters. They are Sarichandra Rai, Bhupendranath Datta, B.R. Ambedkar, Panchanan Mitra, Birja Shankar Guha, K.P. Chattopadhyay, T.C. Das. He feels that Indian anthropologists failed to follow the nationalist predecessors and relied more on Western researchers. And in fact, we go on using the terms coming from Western anthropologists, and then here the American anthropologists like David G. Mandelbaum, he expressed that jati can be a more appropriate term than caste in his book Society in India. Indian anthropologists continue to use these colonial terms, though they are not appropriate. Even clan, which is also not appropriate and not equal to Gotra, but students always use clan and Gotra as equivalent. There is no clarity. Now, the anthropologists continue to use these terms, ignoring any categories. Attention continues on exotic practices and customs. Only significant change is whatever that is there in the colonial period, the study of blood groups and anthropometric measurements, it actually sees as part of ethnographic surveys. Earlier ethnographic surveys, castes and tribes, they always took these measurements, but now social anthropologists don't take these measurements at all. We have studies actually talking about the relation between tribes and castes and Hinduism and tribal religion. We have not othered the tribal communities completely. We know we have concepts like tribe caste mobility, tribe caste continuum, and so on. And other cultures' approach was not followed for a long period. All these processes have been highlighted, and the linkages have been established. Vinay Kumar Srivastava, writing on the tribal communities that have been Hinduized from times immemorial, he wrote that tribal groups are attracted towards Hinduism. Those who are in the close proximity of the Hindus were attracted. Some of them tried to move up in the Hindu caste hierarchy by climbing the status of warriors or merchants. Kshatriyization and also imitating this Vaishya model was also there among many of the tribal communities. Many Western anthropologists were studying this Kshatriyization process, including our Indian anthropologist K.S. Singh. Number of linkages established between tribes and castes. Except in the Northeast, contact and continuity can be seen between tribals and non-tribals in social, religious, political spheres. And based on available literature, others highlighted varying levels of continuity between Hindu society, tribal communities, by showing about the commensal relations, hierarchy, Hindu gods and goddesses, origin myths, folklore, tribal labels having caste prefixes and caste suffixes, number of Hindu beliefs and practices. So a lot of interaction is there between the tribal communities and caste communities which was established. The point is that we have not completely othered the tribal communities. Now I am moving towards decolonization and indigenization. Desire for indigenization is the outcome of realization about the inappropriateness of theories and concepts of colonial academic disciplines. Post-colonialism is a stand and movement against essentialism, identification of core characters, and essentialist constructions of cultures as distinctive entities. For post-colonial scholars, the Western anthropologists looked at third world societies through the lens of their own cultures and with an attitude of supremacy. The post-colonialists advocate decolonization of the discipline to reverse the effects of colonial understanding and the consequences of colonial domination. Now, attempts towards decolonization. I already mentioned about Indological approach using Indian texts, concepts, and all these things. Here I have to mention Bhaijanath Saraswati, who used concepts like Maryada and Parampara. He thought that the terms actually a better description of social conduct and tradition. We use the word tradition, but Parampara is more appropriate. In fact, Saraswati coined a concept called as Nilakantha syndrome, explaining accommodation of negative elements that cannot be assimilated. So Nilakantha putting the poison in the neck because it cannot be assimilated. There are many elements which cannot be completely assimilated, and then they are actually continue there as Nilakantha syndrome. So we have people who try to use better terms. We use little tradition, great tradition, but Saraswati used Shastric, Laukik, and Nayavritik. In fact, a parallel can be seen in the usage of concepts by Nirmal Kumar Bose, who mentioned about respectability of Lokachara, Kulachara, and Deshachara in Indian civilization. In fact, this reminds me of the concept of levels of socio-cultural integration of Julian Stewart. And apart from these use of concepts and texts and all these things, the other change is the concern for welfare, development, and then issues of people, which was not there during the colonial period. But before going into the applied aspects of anthropology, which were a later development, let me spend some time on the Indian tradition, which was actually began with Nirmal Kumar Bose, the focus on civilization. British colonial writers mostly focused on study of tribes and castes, but they never used the word civilization. They avoided the word civilization. Archaeologists were talking about Indus Valley civilization, but the British social anthropologists were talking about castes and tribes. They were not willing to accept this as a civilization. Nirmal Kumar Bose, of course, combined Indology, ethnology, history, functionalism, and all these things. And Nirmal Kumar Bose's interest in civilization extends beyond the study of academic interests, but extends to welfare and nationalism. So his interest in study of civilization is not academic, anthropological, where simple, complex kind of dichotomy we use to study culture and civilization. And Nirmal Kumar Bose was in search of roots of perennial strengths of Indian civilization. He felt that if we understand the roots, we can also move to the solutions to the contemporary problems. And Nirmal Kumar Bose inquiries about national development and then other things, several interests he has. But what is important is Bose felt unhappy about anthropologists not moving beyond books written by foreign scholars. So we can distinguish Nirmal Kumar Bose and then others who conduct ethnographic studies in the colonial mode. Many conducted studies in the colonial mode, but Nirmal Kumar Bose had different kinds of concern. Nirmal Kumar Bose also wrote several integration of tribes. There's one paper on integration of tribes of Andhra Pradesh, and his presentations in Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Simla, are also well known. One thing I want to quote from Nirmal Kumar Bose, which he wrote as Commissioner for SC and ST. In accordance with the traditions of Indian civilization, it has been our consistent policy not to try and impose a uniform culture by force upon all constituent elements in the Indian nation. So much so that some portions of India where the tribal communities are in considerable majority, the culture and social solidarity are preserved by 5th schedule and 6th schedule of the Constitution. So Nirmal Kumar Bose being a Gandhian. So the civilizational approach of Bose has two dimensions. the unity between diverse elements, distinctiveness versus other civilizations. So unity of this civilization, Indian civilization, and distinctiveness of Indian civilization, these are the two concerns of Nirmal Kumar Bose. And what is important is he emphasized on social history. So from structural functionalism, which was a dominant trend during the colonial anthropology and later, historical approach, social historical approach is also there in Nirmal Kumar Bose, right? So he always looked for the strengths of Indian civilization, going back and forth to the roots and contemporary problems. So what are the trends in the study of Indian civilization? The British were not interested in the unity of the Indian civilization. They are not interested in this dimension at all. Anthropologists considered civilization as an advancement over culture. And Indian civilization, I am tempted to quote here B.S. Cohn, while introducing his book, India, Social Anthropology of a Civilization, he wrote one sentence in the introduction. I quote, "It will be an audacity or intellectual arrogance to talk about a 5,000-year-old civilization, one of the world's few ancient civilizations, along with Egypt, Mesopotamia, China, Peru, Mesoamerica, exhibiting immense diversity which represents fusion of past, present, and future." Cohn tried to capture the essence of Indian civilization. What are the enduring aspects? Essence of civilization, cultural geography, and cultural history are his concerns. The civilization represents a continuity of religious symbols. This is how he looks at civilization. Civilization represents a continuity of religious symbols, philosophies, social institutions, starting from Indus Valley. And there are discontinuities because of invasions from northwest subcontinent, Islam, Christianity, colonial impact. These are all discontinuities. Continuity is there for 5,000 years, discontinuities in terms of these kinds of invasions. In fact, American anthropologists were different from the British anthropologists. They took interest in the study of civilization. Robert Redfield and Milton Singer's book, Great Tradition Modernizes, is well known. They all have interest in the Indian civilization. And considering India as orthogenetic or indigenous civilization, attention was paid to cultural role of orthogenetic cities, role of multiplicity of networks, how the integration brought about because of these networks and centers is the main approach of the American anthropologists in the study of civilization. The influence of American anthropology led us to study of peasant societies, village studies, civilizational processes, study of networks and centers, cultural interaction processes like great tradition, little tradition, universalization, parochialization. All these things go beyond essentialist static picture of society provided by the British anthropologists. Now, I'm avoiding some of the things about the achievements of Indian civilization or decline of Indian civilization. But one thing has to be mentioned, that there were depictions about India as a frozen civilization and static society. The often quoted statement of Charles Metcalfe, which is very lengthy quotation, dynasty after dynasty tumbles, and then after the end of quotation it says that Indian society remains the same. That is, changes happened only at the top and then no changes at the bottom. So you have a static picture coming, but the American anthropologists were different. The static and frozen picture was rightly questioned by social historians and then American anthropologists. Even in the colonial government, people used it to petition government with claims and counterclaims over the status and identities. There is nothing status about this, nothing actually fixed about these positions and statuses. There are always changes. Social historians told us that how the hierarchies have changed. So the stereotypes and essentializations coming from colonial period were debunked by scholars, including American scholars like Ronald Linden, Imagining India, and Nicholas Dux. So in the other section, I talked about the relation between anthropology and history and how the anti-historical bias of structural functionalism influenced the Indian anthropologists. and how the American anthropologists like B.S. Cohn were different, combining a historical and then ethnographic approach together. But we have a major influence coming from M.N. Srinivas, and then the functionalist anthropology dominated over India. And what is required is synchronic studies. We have to come out of the synchronic studies and structural functional mindset, and historical sensitivity and historical inputs are essential if we want to capture the processes of socio-cultural dynamics. And we have a number of examples where different types of historical materials were used. Now, post-independence agenda, post-colonial agenda, one agenda included the development agenda. From salvage anthropology, which was the beginning, documenting the vanishing cultures, and then ethnographic studies, people shifted to study of policies and all these things. Here also, I want to actually talk about the colonial and post-colonial distinctions. Now, in the development process of the Third World, the Western development models, concepts, ideas, and experiments have penetrated in the name of aid and expertise. And this takes us to the issue of different explanations for underdevelopment in India. As I said, Indian society has been portrayed by Western scholars as slow-changing society, lacking in innovative qualities and entrepreneurial abilities. So we have, starting from Max Weber onwards, and then Gunnar Myrdal, all these people said, you have to reform your institutions. Institutions are main obstacle for development and all these things. The Western scholars prescribed the need for elimination of traditional cultural practices and institutions like Hinduism, caste, joint family for ushering in development. They denigrated Indian society, blamed the otherworldly focus or non-materialistic focus of Hinduism. But this was also questioned by later writers like Milton Singer, Scarlett Epstein. Scarlett Epstein questioned the notions and showed the rationality of the villagers in continuing with certain kinds of relations and not breaking away. Milton Singer, of course, showed the religious beliefs and entrepreneurial activities even in a traditional society. So what is important is the relation between culture and development, which was emphasized by later scholars. We have number of dilemmas about what kind of developmental should we follow. Endogenous model, exogenous model, self-reliance, interdependence, growth versus distribution, industry versus agriculture, centralized planning versus decentralized planning, physical investment or investment in human resources, latest technology or intermediate technology. Now, in all these debates in the development sphere, we have the undercurrent of considering for Western prescription or evolving our own homemade solution. What solution should be there for our developmental problems? Completely following the Western prescriptions, or in fact, here I want to mention about what T.N. Madan wrote about endogenous models of development. Madan pointed out to the eco-friendly and sustainable nature of prescriptions of Indian philosophies. Many Western scholars blamed the Indian institutions. Madan underlined that India could achieve a modern, diversified economy. And he said that many of the problems are because of adoption of inappropriate development strategies borrowed from the West and under the influence of colonial disciplines of economics, sociology, anthropology, and so on. Madan pointed out that economic development, if it is not linked to cultural goals, it leads to mindless consumerism. And he argued for an endogenous development model encompassing Indian culture, ethics, and philosophy. This actually calls for a redefinition of goals of development. Now I have two more sections about globalization and postmodernism. One section, which is a big section, but what is actually essence is in this, the postmodernists, they were all criticizing the colonial anthropologists, their field work, their selection, their interpretations. So we have actually much to learn from the postmodernists about criticizing these colonial writers. So globalization, we talk about homogenization, disappearance of cultural traits and all these things. But also globalization also is helping us to retain media and market. They are keeping the cultural traditions alive. So media reminding people about the traditional music, dance, customs, practices, religious significances, all these things we are now learning, which we forgot through media. Market also is reminding us of many things for their own interest, but we are actually keeping the traditions alive because of these market forces. While people are developing indifference and ignorance about cultural practices, media and market are reminding and preserving them. All these are now playing a role in overcoming the imposed identities to assert indigenous cultural identities. So the practice of anthropology in the post-colonial period requires a different orientation encompassing global influence and local response. We have to understand the ideological underpinnings of imported theories, imported concepts, imported categories. And then this actually takes us to what is the change that is required, what is the future pathway. We have to revise our curricula, giving importance to Indian concepts, Indian scholars. Shedding of colonial identity and formulating a post-colonial identity for the discipline depends much on how the subject is taught in colleges and universities. I mentioned about some of these curricula exercises of CDC, of UGC and all these things, where there was no discussion about the colonial base of the discipline or how to overcome or how to revise the curricula. In this backdrop, the need is to provide requisite training to students, revising the curricula and focusing on national, regional, and we teach mostly books from abroad and then American, British, and all these things, and not much from Indian books. We have to sensitize our students about conditions, the objectives of knowledge construction during the colonial period, so that we don't take that knowledge for granted. Alternative material based on current practice in the discipline and society become more relevant. Books written by Indian scholars should receive importance. And in fact, all these training programs are an opportunity. ICSR methodology or UGC, Human Resource Development Centers, induction programs. In all these things, actually, we can sensitize about decolonization, indigenization, and drawbacks of blindly following the Western models and then concepts. There are many important areas to be considered for inclusion in the curricula of Indian anthropology departments for decolonizing and making the curricula more contemporary. Is it possible to draft a vision and mission statement for anthropology? Because now we draft a vision and mission statement for every aspect, discipline. But what about anthropology? This vision and mission statement, can it have actually, there can be multiple visions, no problem. But what is important is to understand this decolonization and indigenization. And what are the institutional structures available for operationalization of this vision? How do we operationalize this vision and mission? Can these professional associations, research journals, departments, they play a role in this regard? Because professional associations also are influenced by Western organizations, they are affiliated and then they dictate. So now I come to the conclusion of the present. We need to examine the various influences of colonial and post-colonial anthropologists and the consequences in shaping anthropology in India, various writers and how they shaped anthropology in India. And we have to think about the stereotype of conservative preservationist discipline about this anthropology. This stereotype persists. And we have to understand the relevance of concepts and categories originated elsewhere. Their applicability needs a close scrutiny. Most importantly, the need is to erase the image of anthropology as a product of colonial era. Now, can we reverse the academic dependency? Is it possible? Because every time we hold a meeting in a university and all that, they always say, where are you in QS ranking? global ranking, where are you? See, this rankings may become a trap for us to continue with the Western domination and aping Western academics. If you want QS ranking, you have to teach, and then you have to follow, you have to ape everything from the Western academia. So I don't know how we can actually reverse this academic dependency of disciplines. We look always towards the Western universities for everything. A neglected dimension in anthropology is what is called as public anthropology. Some anthropologists are completely avoiding the planners, policymakers, and all these things are taking interest only in public issues and public debates. Can we do that? Public or perish is the slogan given by some of these anthropologists. Not publish or perish, public or perish. So can we have that kind of a shift in anthropology? For example, when there was September 11 in US, the students published a book, September 11, Context and Consequences. So it is generally concerned from public point of view. University of California at Berkeley. But we focus more on various kinds of traditional topics like tribal studies and all these things. No disciplinary journal can be expected to announce a special volume on a triple talaq, women and Sabarmali, LGBT question. If Supreme Court allows a woman and woman to marry, we start examining our concepts, definitions and all these things. But less from the point of view of implications for the wider society. We need to define priorities and issues, setting agenda for decolonization and indigenization, with the objective of liberation from Western intellectual domination. We may have to learn from academic traditions of those countries where there was no experience of colonialism. What kind of anthropology, sociology they were doing, where there was no colonial discipline, no experience of colonialism there. Is it possibility to question the colonial identity of Indian society as a hierarchical society, homo hierarchicus, and other kinds of caste-based society, and transcend national boundaries and foster a South Asian identity? And lastly, at the same time, in the name of Indianization and decolonization, we do not resort to insulating the discipline from everything that is coming from outside. We should not insulate, but at the same time, we have to think about decolonization. Thank you very much for a very patient hearing.
It is really an alarming study and alarming topic. If I correctly remember, the anthropology study started in India in 1921 in University of Kerala. Professor Joshi may correct, and University of Calcutta, Professor Joshi may correct, that's what I'm saying. So it's now almost 103 years, and we are discussing about the Indian perspective of anthropological studies in India. It's also really pathetic to see, despite having the fact that more than 120 universities teaching anthropology in different courses in Indian universities, and almost more than 50 colleges are teaching anthropology in different courses. And still we are struggling to find an Indian perspective of anthropological studies. It's really an alarming thing. At the IGNCA in the Janapada Sampada Division, we are fortunate to have scholars who have the strong anthropological background. It is a division known for its ethnographic studies, anthropological studies, civilizational studies, and we have been doing an research documentation on different aspects of Indian culture and civilization. But recently we have been discussing about the literature which is available for our studies and references, and we realized, which has very rightly been put up by Professor Rao, that there is hardly any material which has been prepared from the Indian context to study the subject of anthropology. A few days back, with some other organization, we did the similar exercise for the study of social work in India. Because social work study in India started in 1936, and it was the European influence which brought the social work studies in India. And then we realized that the whatever social work studies started, it always had the European influence, and I should not quote, but the influence dominated by the missionaries to study the social work in India. So there was a feeling generated not only in the society by and large, but also in the students who were studying social work, that whatever concept of social work remained, it came from the Europe to India, and we never had the concept of social work in our country, which is wrong, as you can realize. That when we talk about dharmshala and pyaus and bhandaras and langars, they are age-old traditions in Indian society, and we do not by per se formulate them in a social work, but they are the cause being done for the society, by the society, to uplift the morale of the society. Similar thing struck to our mind, that why can't we do the similar exercise and start finding the context of social work studies in India. When we started this exercise, we had very strong opposition from not from people abroad, but from people within the country who had strong leftist leaning and who had strong objections on saying that this social work studies, Indian perspective should not be discussed, because when you discuss the Indian perspective, you also tend to become religious per se. We were not discussing religion, we were discussing the society. The similar thing, similar challenges you would face when you talk about the Indian context of anthropological studies. So we have to be prepared for that kind of an opposition when we talk about Indian perspective of anthropological studies. Asiatic Society came in existence in 1784, I think so. And when Asiatic Society came, the studies related to India started, and many scholars devoted their time in studying the culture and the context of Indian existence as a civilization, age-old civilization. But when you look at the Asiatic Society today, you don't find any encouraging scene over there. Why? Because it has again been dominated by the people who do not have the pro-India leaning as far as the physical, as far as the mentality is concerned and the educational background is concerned. So we need to understand that when we talk about the anthropological studies and try to decolonize our mind and find out the resources which are available from the Indian perspective, we are definitely going to have some kind of a resistance and opposition from the people who have a set procedure and bent of mind which is pro-left and pro-west. But the time has come, as I recollect, after 103 years, we are talking about the Indian perspective of anthropology. And when Professor Venkata Rao talks about the reflections and future pathways, we need to understand the future is not very easy going, it has a tough going. We need to find out the proper references and we need to find out proper resources to build up our own anthology of the Indian perspective of anthropological studies. And when we say this, we must also try to understand that now the task is for the youngsters who are studying the anthropology. So we need to generate awareness among all these 120 odd universities who are teaching anthropology in different levels, or some colleges where anthropological studies are being conducted. And we need to sort of bring the youngsters, the young scholars together to think about this. There should be debate and there should be open forum debate where we discuss, we deliberate open-heartedly without any inhibitions and without any preconditions, and come up with the brighter facts of life. IGNCA has been blessed to have the services of experts like Saraswati ji and Kamlesh Dutt Tripathi ji, who have been stalwarts in these areas of studies. Even today we have some very bright scholars working in the IGNCA. and IGNCA can play a pivotal role in conducting all these studies. But let us not forget the fact that IGNCA has its limitation as an institution, and we are not a university to sort of take this mental ahead or say, lead the entire discussion or discourse of anthropological studies. But when our Prime Minister calls for taking a pledge in Panchapran and ask us to decolonize our minds and also ask us to care for our heritage and respect our heritage, it is a great challenge for the youngsters to sort of take up that challenge. We must come forward and take up that challenge. The perspective is very clear. The next battle or the next world war or the next clashes among the civilizations of the world would not be an atomic clash or a military clash. It is going to be the clash of narratives. One who sets the narrative wins the battle. That we have seen in case of other countries. Just see the case of China, how they are building the narrative and trying to win the battle through their narratives because they are setting the narratives. And then when one country sets the narrative, the other comes at the defending posture and they need to defend. We need to be aggressive. We need to come forward and set our own narrative as far as the anthropological studies are concerned. So first and foremost question arises, how old are we as a civilization? What should be the date of starting the civilization of this land? Somebody says 5,000, someone says 10,000, someone says 15,000. But even today, after Vakandkarji's studies, we could not find anyone else who had even ventured to find out how old is the Bhimbetka caves, or do we have older caves than Bhimbetka as well? As far as my knowledge goes, and I can remember, Vakandkarji himself has said that this is only the tip of the iceberg, which I have found in Bhimbetka. There are many such caves in the same vicinity. And he said it in 1979, if I correctly remember. After so many years, we could not find other caves. So the lethargic attitude will not serve now. We need to come forward. We need to take the bull by its horn, and this is the right time. And I think I must congratulate and thank Professor Venkata Rao for his erudite scholarship and deep sense of research, which has given us insight to see in this area and come forward. From our side, I can assure you that IGNCA at its Janapada Sampada Division and other colleagues are really ready to facilitate whatever is required to do in this area. And I request all the eminent scholars to come forward and help us out in this mission. Thank you very much.
I welcome you all to this 13th Nirmal Kumar Bose Memorial Lecture on title From Colonial to Postcolonial Anthropology in India, Reflections and Future Pathways. Professor Nirmal Kumar Bose lecture series was instituted by IGNCA in 1993 to honor Professor N.K. Bose and his contribution to the world of scholars and his pioneers' work on Indian civilization which has always been matched by profound concern for human welfare. Till now, we have organized 12 lectures have been delivered under this series by eminent anthropologists and social scientists and humanities professors. I once again welcome you all to this 13th N.K. Bose Memorial Lecture. Thank you all. Thank you so much.